COP29 being held in Baku, Azerbaijan. The real significance of COP29 is, once again, the world sees more records are being broken in terms of temperature worldwide, in terms of natural disasters deriving from global climate change, and again, the increases in global average temperature. This is really significant because the trend is toward a point of no return. I think it's very clear that a bad base has been built in the atmosphere by the industrialization of the developed economies over the last 2 centuries, or actually more than 2 centuries. They must be held responsible for this. Now, can you now tell the developing countries, sorry, you cannot industrialize, you cannot modernize, you cannot develop yourself because you'll be polluting the world? So after prolonged negotiations, there's been some commitments made by developed countries, unfortunately, that the developing countries are still not getting the financial support that's necessary for them to continue to transition to sustainable development with new and renewable sources of energy. There's one exception in this, and that's China. I think China has actually been committing to energy conversion, and it's actually doing exactly what it says it would do. Over 50% of new and renewable sources of energy rollout last year was in China. 80% of the manufacturing capacity of solar panels are in China, over 50% of wind as well. China is also developing hydrogen power. Now the issue with this is that even though, because of what China has done in terms of creating economies of scale, as well as a complete sophisticated supply chain to bring down the cost of new renewable sources of energy to the point where it's now 1/10 of what it was a little more than a decade ago in terms of solar. That's still not enough because the initial capital cost of solar farms, storage, batteries is still very expensive. So it's difficult for developing countries to completely wean itself off coal-fired power plants, despite the fact that solar panels have really came down in price. So they still need a lot of help and support from developed economies who were the biggest contributors and who had been the biggest contributors for centuries to pollution. I think there's an issue here in terms of for developing countries, for the global south. I don't think anyone has the right, that's the developed countries, to say to countries like India or Africa, to say that, sorry, you have to slow down your development. You have to consider the climate change impact. You have to consider your electrification bringing about further carbon emissions into the atmosphere. Cannot do that. The right to development is a human right, and the right of developing countries to improve its lives of its people, to improve its modernization, to accelerate its industrialization is a fundamental right. So I think it's very important for developed countries to adhere to their commitments and actually deliver in terms of their commitments, in terms of helping and support of developing countries' modernization process with renewable sources of energy. Now, in terms of this, there's another significant hypocrisy aspect of the Western countries. China solar panels are subject to various custom duties, so-called anti-dumping duties. Now, how can you claim that you want to improve the global climate conditions and reduce fossil fuel energy use and use new renewable sources of energy, in the meantime, make it more expensive and more difficult for countries and people to use solar panels by imposing all kinds of duties and all kinds of custom duties on Chinese-made solar panels? Also, even more ridiculous is on the demand side, electric vehicles. EU just imposed various duties on Chinese-made electric vehicles. And US is now talking about not 100%, but potentially 200% duty on electric vehicles. Electric vehicles reduces fossil fuel use, reduces carbon emissions into the atmosphere. And on the one side, they claim that they want to have better environment, reduce carbon emission, and in fact impose a carbon tax. On the other side, make it more difficult and more expensive for those who want to reduce carbon emission by using electric vehicles. This is hypocrisy. I think the Global South will make their demands, and the Global South will do its best to do energy conversion with Chinese support. And Chinese support, in this case, I want to quote a wonderful expression from a friend of mine, that China is pricing everybody in through abundance, while the West is pricing everybody out through scarcity.